Hello everyone, Yaksamash, and welcome back to Wrench Reads, Trilogy of Morgalla, Diary of a Lonely Demon, number 6. If this is the first video you've watched in the series, click the on-screen annotation and go back to the introduction. Start there. And as always, I will be linking to the actual novel in the info bar below. This is directly to the novel that I'm going to be reading today, as always. I'm glad to be back. I took a couple of weeks off for the holidays, family, friends. It was fantastic. Cold here, hence why I got the new hat, as you might have noticed. This is one of those hats where you walk down the street in it and people know for certain you're not afraid of anything. So, I hope you all had a very fantastic holiday, and I figure I might as well start catching up. I've got a couple weeks to make up for. But today's introduction is more about the common arguments that Jon's White Knights like to use to kind of prop him up, prop his ego up, when trying to defend his work on places like Amazon. I can't get the actual Amazon quotes to come up on my phone, so I can't read them to you, so I'll be paraphrasing. But this is another example of an argument or a line of reasoning you should never use. This could be here, there, anywhere, any kind of writing. Don't use this argument to try to defend someone. Yes. I found this on one of Toxic Witchling's fantastic reviews. She kind of shortened her massive review to put into Amazon, and it was brilliant. I'll be putting that in the description box below so you can read the full thing. It's well worth your time, especially if you're thinking of buying Jon's second book. But I've also seen this on a couple of others as well, including Allie's, including another friend of mine. And all of them are just... It tends to follow a very singular line of argument. That line of argument is, give him a chance. Don't rag on this book until you've read it. And this is the first of, I think, two that I'm going to discuss very briefly. This one is very obvious, and it has a very quick and very easy answer. Don't judge the book before you've read it. The vast majority of people who have read the second book and have actually left reviews on Amazon have read the book. They have read the book and they have made their comments on it. Now, admittedly, every one of them read the rough draft, the draft that Jon had sent Allie a long time ago. So a couple things can have changed, but the vast majority of things will have stayed the same. But the point is, it's not as though the reviewers went in blind, deaf, and dumb. This is an argument that is essentially saying, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Whereas each and every one of the people who have reviewed it have good reason to review it negatively. Whereas most of the people who have actually read it probably haven't reviewed it positively because they've actually read it. And I'm open to change my mind on that. If I knew that these people actually read it, based on the review, I wouldn't come down hard on them. But anyway, second argument for Jon is more or less the argument made by the leave Brittany alone guy. Don't make this personal. Don't bring this as a personal jab on Jon and try to bring him down based on a personal vendetta or a personal agenda. And again, I'm not doing this because I dislike Jon personally. I'm doing this because Jon's work is... It's interesting. Jon's work is interesting. I'm not doing this because of Jon. I'm doing this because of his work. And I have to... yeah. If you ever wanted to know my rationality for it, there you go. The work itself is just not worth it. And to prevent people from wasting their money, to prevent Jon from actually getting more of these so-called White Knights, that I'm sitting here, and as are a lot of the reviewers, are sitting here trying to make sure that people don't make the same mistake. So, yeah. couple of really simple arguments, really simple answers. The first one was an appeal to knowledge. Don't review it unless you have actually read the book. The second was an appeal to emotion. Leave John Boy alone. Leave him alone. So yeah, but that's it for the introduction, and a bit of a ramble. But today, I'd like to continue and get as far as I can in the second chapter, and if we're lucky, if this doesn't take too long, I'd like to get to the third chapter. We'll see how long it takes to read up to the point that I wanted to stop. But where we left off, we had met Delilah, and we had kind of gotten an idea as to what Delilah stood for. We haven't actually gotten into the point where John paints Delilah as this rabid feminist who thinks men are only good, or who think men are better seen and not heard, kind of thing, reversing the kind of standard cultural masculine feminine roles. But well, this is John. We'll get there. It's a little ways from now, but we'll get there. And as always, I'll do the full reading first, and then I will go back and give you my comments. So, without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy, and thanks for coming by. So, yes, let's see here. The last section ended with "I hate my life." This is after Morgalla had finished writing in her journal or diary. This is after a section break as well. She sighed, having stood in the long line for quite a while. The beings around her, of many different sizes and shapes, were also annoyed by the wait. Patience is not a virtue of demons. "Don't spend it all in one place," a voice said at the head of the long line. The banker was an oddity, even among demons. She seemed to be an amalgam of different animals which could be found on countless worlds. She was a female with a very muscular physique, though her voices were high-pitched and her movements were as feminine as the most elite princess. Her skin was like velvet to the touch and a dark shade of gray. Her body's overall shape was much like that of a primate, often hunched over. She would stand on 2 legs, but often walk on 4. Only 3 fingers and toes were at the end of her appendages. She had 2 long necks, much like a snake's body, and they were incredibly flexible. At the end of each neck was a face, much like that of a cat. Each face had 2 lovely orange eyes that peered out at the world. It was the 2 heads sharing one body that made her an oddity. However, It was the 2 heads sharing one body that made her an oddity. However, she never wanted to be known as they, but her. "Next," one of the heads shouted. The large demon in front of Morgalla stepped to the side, and her small features were presented to the 2 sets of eyes. "Hello again, young orange one," the second head called, dropping off or picking up. "I believe Delilah had something brought here," Morgalla said, standing at the marble counter which came up to her collarbone. "Ah, yes, she did. A special order." The banker's powerful arm reached beneath the counter and took out a small bag. The sound of metal came from within. Morgalla, in turn, gave her an empty sack. "Sorry, the gold is not as much," one of the heads said regretfully. "The spoils were much smaller than anticipated." "You know, you're the only person who brings the bags back," the second head stated with great annoyance. "I can see how that can be annoying," Morgalla said. "You have no idea." Morgalla opened the sack that had just been handed to her and looked at its contents. With a pen that was on the counter before her, she reached in and took out a ring. The other head spoke up. "You always do that to jewelry. Why don't you ever want... you always do that. Why don't you ever want jewelry?" "Personal preference," Morgalla said with a small wave of her hand. "See you next week." Her last statement was filled with doubt. As she walked past the long line, there were rumblings of disapproval about how long the line was and how the banker was in a chatty mood today, making the line go even slower. "Next," both heads shouted. Morgalla did not hear one word of English from any of the demons waiting in line. She could, however, feel their anger, hear their disapproval in the tones of their voices, and sense the emotions emanating from their soul. She exited the main chamber. 2 massive guards armed with spears stood on either side of the doorway. Night would come soon. She had to make it back to her sanctuary in the Mountain of Pain. Flashes of red decorated the landscape and illuminated those in attendance within the cobblestone courtyard. She recognized one face immediately. He had his entourage of 2. He was dressed in wealth, with the most expensive of clothes. He wore rings on both hands, and a shadow blade medallion with the emblem of his family on it hung around his neck. He chose to be subtle with his piercings, and had only one in either ear. His hair was long and black, and it blew softly in the evening wind. His eyes, as gold as the jewelry he wore, looked upon her. He had done this on many days, as often as he could. His skin was a dark shade of violet, much like the night sky of hell itself. The subtle claws in his fingertips ran over the medallion around his neck as he smiled at her. "Hello, Morgalla." Her face showed as much emotion as a stone statue. She cared not what he had to say, though she was annoyed that she could not avoid him. He must have seen her enter and waited for her to exit. "Damn!" Italics. Unitalics. "You were missed at the battle today," he said. "So were you," italics. "Blood doesn't wash out of clothing very easily, Vex." He gave a slight sneer at her mocking him. "We each do our part, Morgalla. Besides, I thought you were the pacifist. Would you not want someone who shares your views?" "We all kill when necessary," Morgalla smirked now, the first sign of emotion. He stepped forward, and she exhibited no change in her behavior or mood, though the smirk was gone. He was walking a tightrope with her, and he had to be careful. A deadly game of chess was being played. One wrong move could be quite costly. The price of failure might even be his life. She did her best to hide her intentions, and what she happened to be feeling at the moment. It was something she had become accustomed doing day after day. Her cloak concealed her arms, and she might have been hiding a weapon. This was a fact that did not escape him. "Please accept the gift," he said, as a member of his entourage stepped forward and presented to her a necklace made of gold. "Spoils of war. Won earlier today." Italics. "More likely you took it from someone who is already dead." Italics. "No, thank you." "Infidel! You would deny his gift?" That's not in italics. It's... Yeah. "Call off your lackey, Vex," she demanded, with her eyes on him and not the servant. "Insolent bitch!" the lackey yelled, drawing his weapon. Vex was about to warn him, to order him not to attack, but it was too late. Morgalla drew not her shadow blade, but the weapon she had hidden beneath her cloak. Vex's fears were justified as her blade drove through flesh. It was an instrument that was longer and narrower than an average dagger or knife, and she struck her opponent with precision which rivaled that of a surgeon. It found its mark, and ended the life of her would-be attacker. He fell to the ground, a lifeless husk. Morgalla's eyes never left Vex, who kept his distance from her, the only wise move he had made that day. The body, now changing to nothing but a vile black puddle, sent a smell across the air. Already there were sounds in the distance, the wildlife of hell coming out of hiding from their lairs of darkness. Morgalla did not turn her back to Vex or the lackey standing next to him as she passed. She held out the blade, pointing at the two of them as a warning not to approach. "Delilah would be proud," he said. She reached the end of the courtyard and started down the path that would lead her to the Mountain of Pain. I just want to see if I can get to the next section. No. I'm going to leave that in the next section for next week. There's actually 2 sections. that I'll be reading next week. I stopped at... where did I stop? But that's the reading for today. A little bit shorter, I think, but I'll make up for that next week. Let's see. So let's go back and talk about a few things that really caught me regarding this section of the book. There's really nothing that I want to do a longer rant about today, so I'll just go through my comments and I'll see what you guys have to say. Go ahead and leave me a comment below. The first part is kind of interesting. Morgalla talks to a banker demon here in somewhere that gives her a sack of gold, and then she is beset by this character named Vex. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The first section is more of John's patented kind of pseudo-description. The beings around her of many different shapes and sizes were also annoyed by the weight. Patience is not a virtue of demons. Sizes and shapes. We don't know if there are different classes of demons. We don't know if there are different jobs in the demonic, kind of world. We just know that demons of different shapes and sizes. We're spending so much time in hell, and we still don't know anything about how hell operates. I'll get to that. I'll get more into that in a second. But first, I'd like to kind of ask almost a request of any artists who are out there and listening to this or watching this. The second true paragraph, the second and third true paragraph, describes this amalgamation of creatures, this chimera of all these different creatures from all these different worlds, quote unquote. Because every single creature that this thing was actually described as were all Earth-based characters. But again, we have Earths all over the place with all the different types of all the same animals on all these different worlds, or at least I assume. My request is this. Listen to the description that John gave in my reading a couple minutes ago and draw what this thing looks like and just post it somewhere. If you want to post it on the Morgalla Sucks Facebook page, linked below, I will probably end up seeing it. But I want to see what you guys kind of make of this. If you have a similar mental picture as I am, and it doesn't have to be super detailed or anything. I just want to see if the thing makes sense. And it's John's writing. It really doesn't. But maybe we can make it make sense. I don't know. I have made a point about, animals on countless worlds, cats and gorillas and snakes, all found on the same worlds as humans. And another comment, her voices were high-pitched, and her movements were as feminine as those of the most elite princesses. The physiology doesn't work here. Voices are just as much a part of your physiology as it is of your actual gender. For instance, a very feminine kind of woman will have a very feminine voice because that's how her voice box and the entire structure of her body is actually constructed. Whereas someone like me, I'm a larger guy, I have a deeper voice. So John's kind of having conflicting examples in physiology here, where her voice is really high-pitched and feminine, and her movements are very feminine, even though this creature is the farthest thing from, straight-up feminine. I mean, he doesn't even describe the body as a feminine version of this chimera, slimmer, perhaps more lithe. It's John's writing, everybody. Okay, next I talked about the three-fingered appendages, arms and legs, 3 fingers on each appendage, 2 necks, no tail to speak of. And there's no real description as to why they want to be called they rather than her. That's another line in here. She never wanted to be known as they, but her. No explanation. This gets into one of the primary things that I have disliked about this book, where you'll never see the banker again. Ever. You'll never see this banker again. But John gives an inordinate amount of time for description. I mean, he doesn't describe the demons waiting in line. Couldn't he have just done the same thing with the banker and made this and just chopped a couple paragraphs off from this section? Grammar issue here. The sound of metal came from within Morgalla and in turn gave her an empty sack. Sorry, the gold is not as much, one of the heads said regretfully. Sorry, the gold is not as much is not a sentence. Is not a grammatically accurate sentence. Sorry, there wasn't as much gold in this take, or something. And this also kind of brings up the question about this banker. Like, what kind of economy exists in hell? John does explain what they kind of use the gold for later on, but it doesn't make sense for that to be as a reward, because not every demon is sent out to do what they would use the gold for. So there has to be some other use for this gold within demon culture. And we'll get to it in a second, where one of the characters, this Vex character, is described as wealthy. Wealth implies a large quantity of material wealth, which suggests, at least to me, that this gold that Morgalla got is in some way the way that wealth is measured here. And I'm not even going to go into other spoils that a marauding demon race would actually want to pull off of another world. Gold is absolutely ridiculous. Not every... And this is something I told you earlier, that I was a geology... I'm a geologist by education and by career. Gold is not going to be the same rarity on each planet. Not every civilization is going to value gold as a metal, as a materials. I mean, it's fantastic for electronics, it's fantastic for different things, and as humans, our culture values gold as for monetary values, but not every culture does. Not every culture would, because not every culture has access to it. So, consider that my long rant for today. She took out the ring. I'll get to that next reading. It's the whole concept of her not wanting jewelry is unfounded, and it's ridiculous. It's unnecessary. Personal preference. We got run-on sentences. Her last statement was filled with doubt. Was the proper sentence before this one? As she walked past the long line, there were rumblings of disapproval about how long the line was and how chatty the bankers moved today, making the line go even slower. That could be split very easily into two sentences. We don't know where she is. She's at the bank, obviously. But John says this. She exited the main chamber. Chamber of what? We assume the bank. But where is this bank located? Is it located in a city? Is it located in a castle? Is it located out in the middle of nowhere? We don't know. John's writing, everybody. More vague hand-waving pseudo-descriptions. End of that paragraph where it talks about exiting the main chamber. Flashes of red decorated the landscape and illuminated those in attendance within the cobblestone courtyard. Flashes of red coming from what? We don't know. And if we assume that hell looks like Mount Doom, it's from volcanoes everywhere. But that's an assumption. I can't say that actively, or I can't say that accurately. She recognized one face immediately. He had an entourage of two. He was dressed in wealth with the most expensive of clothes. This is talking about Vex. We don't know what that looks like. What do expensive clothes look like in demon terms? Is it a suit and tie? Is it flowing robes with gold embroidery like you would see in something like Skyrim? We don't know. Again, more vague pseudo-descriptions. He had done this on many days, as often as he could. This is after he said, his eyes, as gold as the jewelry he wore, looked upon her. He had done this on many days, as often as he could. Had done what on many days? Looked upon her? Is it a crime to look at somebody? Demons. Yeah. You were missed at the battle day, so were you. That's just... Dialogue is not John's friend in this. I mean, now, I will say that this discussion between Vex and Morgalla worked really well because John's dialogue is so awkward. It works in an awkward conversation between two characters, but when we start to get into full conversations between two very good characters, we'll see that this kind of dialogue just falls apart, and we'll get there. We'll get there. Morgalla is portrayed as a pacifist, which is absolutely meaningless, pointless, and bullshit, because a pacifist is one who does everything she can to not kill or to be peaceful. I'm a pacifist. I try to settle all my disputes without resulting to violence, anger, irrationality, things like that. Whereas Morgalla kills indiscriminately. Kills indiscriminately, and then gets choked up about it. She's a skilled swordsman. She doesn't have to kill. She could have chopped off his arm. Could have lopped off a leg. As much as I don't want to, I'm thinking of the Black Knight from Monty Python right now. You got no arms! Or, you stupid bastard, you got no arms left! Yes, I have. Okay, I tried. Vex gives her gold, gives her a necklace of gold as a gift. Okay. This really shows me that either Vex has no idea as to how to win a girl's heart or John doesn't. Because a suitor, someone who really gives a shit about the girl, would learn the person that he is trying to court. And it again brings up, and then the other half of this brings up the question: Are demons just raiding planets like common thieves? Couldn't they just develop their own mining system where they were mining gold from hell? It doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't make sense. And then a couple sentences after that, where this is after Morgalla denies the necklace from Vex. Infidel! You would not deny his gift. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Infidel doesn't mean someone who rebuffs a gift. Infidelity, generally implies things like religion. Is there something about the demons that if you give a gift, you're not supposed to refuse it? Is there something in their culture that talks about this? We don't know. Again, we show how John has no idea how to write combat scenes or action. But this is when Morgalla shanked a guy. He doesn't even tell us where or how she shanked him. Vex's fears were justified as the blade drove through flesh somewhere. It was an instrument that was longer and narrower than an average dagger or knife, and she struck her opponent with precision which rivaled that of a surgeon. Again, this is like the last part, or the last thing. We know that her blade's strikes are accurate. The accuracy of a surgeon is unnecessary. A long, narrow blade is called either a dirk or a stiletto. It depends on the blade, but it sounds like Morgalla is using a stiletto. We don't know where it was penetrated. Could have been anywhere on the body, but we have to assume it was somewhere critical because the demon then died. And finally, and this just continues on with what I was saying last time, this is after the body starts to melt. Already there were sounds in the distance, the wildlife of hell coming out of hiding from their layers of darkness. What is the sound? What kind of feeling does it instill? Does it instill fear? Does it instill caution? Does it instill sadness? Does it instill happiness? We don't know. We don't know. And honestly, I have to think that not even John knows what this stuff is. Because we've seen it so many times before that John just doesn't give us these kind of descriptions. So either he, one, doesn't know what he's talking about in his own setting, two, doesn't care about the reader enough to give us enough detail for us to actually puzzle it out ourselves, or three, is clueless to the whole situation. So, with that, I'm done. It's good to be back. Thank you guys very much for stopping by. And so, with that, I'll see you next week. Na zdravie. Peace.